Today I'm talking to Visraant Iyer. He comes from Oakland, having led operations for a national civic engagement and behavioral science firm. In addition, he's run a business as a co-founder and former CEO of a venture-backed fintech company, has been senior consultant at Deloitte for the federal government, worked for multiple senators on the Capitol Hill, as well as multiple presidential campaigns, and executive produced a docu-series which is available on streaming platforms around the world. Vishrant graduated from Harvard Kennedy School with a master's in public policy, concentrating specifically on urban and housing policy, and was also a Goss Fellow at MIT. He holds bachelor degrees in political science and international studies from Northwestern University and is a current MBA candidate at the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. In his spare time, Vishrant enjoys reading, traveling, watching movies, and exploring Oakland and the Bay. This was an amazing conversation, and I hope you enjoy. To start things off, could you tell me more about what you do and what keeps you busy and excited right now?
Work, obviously, for one, keeps me busy, but in my free time, I love to play basketball, love to play tennis. I love going to the movies. I try to do that as much as I can. And yeah.
Yeah, so that's great to hear. I like basketball as well. I know like you work in the area of sort of like urban innovation and development.
hmm
And it seems to me that you've done a lot of things since graduating college. So I guess like tell me more
Yeah.
about the journey that got you here and like which of your choices were planned versus which ones just happened based on the opportunities in front of you and sort of what kind of led you specifically to that like transition from like the tech area to like the government?
Sure. Well, so I'm an immigrant. I was born in India, moved to the US when I was 6.5, 7 years old. And yeah, we when we first moved here, we were, like a middle class, lower middle class family. America like really worked out for my family and I. We kind of that American dream that you hear about, we kind of got it. We worked hard. My parents, I should say, worked really hard and were able to put my brother and me and into a really good situation, into really good schools and work really hard for us and gave us a lot of opportunities that allowed me to get a deeper appreciation for this country, allowed me to love this country and be proud of being an American. And so that I knew that coming out of college, I wanted to be in a position where I could give back and like have an impact and kind of like pass on what I'd been given by this country. So I knew I wanted to eventually be in public service coming out of college, which is why I actually joined a presidential campaign coming out of college because I thought I could move to DC after graduating, so going to campaign, we won, but unfortunately, because of like student loans and stuff, I just needed a job that made some more money. So I took a job back in the private sector, working at a company that's kind of like Amazon, but for logistics, but for factories and warehouses and stuff. But basically, like Amazon, like it's an online e-commerce store. Managed a purchasing department there, learned what it is to be a leader and that position was pretty wild because I was, 21, 22, right out of college, and I was managing people who had been working at the company for longer than I'd been alive. So that was like definitely a big learning experience for me, having these folks like be my direct reports. So I did that for a few years. And then around 2016 was when, at the time when Donald Trump was running for his first term, and was saying kind of basically things that I just strongly disagreed with. Um, I felt like I wanted to get back into politics and get back into public service, so I joined another campaign. Obviously, that campaign didn't go the way the first one did, and ended up going to grad school after that, where I got my master's in public policy at Harvard Kennedy School. And while I was there, I kind of got obsessed with making cities work better. What makes a city work, and how do you make it work better? And especially with housing policy, living in Boston at the time, and but then also having lived in DC, having lived in Chicago, and a little bit in California, housing has always been a big part of kind of the challenge, so to speak, of that I've been interested in. And so while I was at school, started a startup with a friend that helped people buy their first homes. So we partnered on a few homes with people. And I was running that business for a few years and in that fintech space. Went through an accelerator, raised some money for it, was having a great time. And then unfortunately, first my co-founder had to leave because of health issues, and then when we were in the middle of another round that we were raising for, COVID happened, and that was the moment at which, like if you're running a startup, if you ever run a startup or in your future, you every startup has that moment where you have to kind of like decide for yourself, am I delusional enough to keep going? Because that's what it takes to make a startup succeed. Like every startup has that moment of doubt. And at the time, I just decided for myself. We had a team, and people who were starting families and people who were thinking about buying their own homes and all that stuff. And so I just decided I didn't want to take that risk on their behalf. So decided to sell what I could of the startup and come back to something to do with politics. So for the next few years after that, I was running operations for this national organization that uses behavioral science to try and encourage people to vote, particularly people who are less likely to vote. So I did that for a few years. And then last year, moved up to Oakland from LA, and a job opened up that allowed me to run innovation efforts for the City of Oakland. And that was kind of like the perfect marriage of my existing passion and experience in city management, along with being able to use like my tech background and design thinking background in a public service lens, in a public service capacity. And so it was just that kind of perfect marriage of all of my interests into one position. And so that's where I am now.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's really, really cool story. I guess like specifically that transition from sort of the presidential campaign you joined initially to taking that leadership role in the tech and private sector. I
Yeah.
know you mentioned that your current job is sort of like the perfect marriage and blend between those two types of roles. I guess like what specific skills do you see and mindsets carrying on from leadership in a governmental perspective and like a perspective of like leading the city or leading a population versus like leading a group to make a good product?
Yeah. Problem definition. I think that's a very kind of underrated skill set. I think for a lot of people, when they look at something that's wrong with the world, the problem is obvious. And you can say, like, oh, that's a problem, but really understanding what is causing a thing that's wrong in the world and really understanding how that happened and how it came to be and what are the existing incentive structures and existing systems that produced the what you're seeing allows you to really understand a problem deeper than I think a lot of people take the time to do. And that comes from a design thinking tech background, and applying that to a public problem allows you to really drive value where a lot of public servants who do amazing work are often kind of in the middle of upkeeping a system and upkeeping and or carrying out certain tasks in the course of their public service, and they don't have the time to really sit back and really grasp a problem deeply in the way that my team can. And so I think that skill is really important. And then after that, understanding trade-offs. I think when you're in the public sphere, there's often an impulse or an inclination to kind of promise things to people and to say, yes, we can do this, yes, we can do this, yes, we can do this. But, just like in the private sector, like trade-offs exist in making real policy decisions, and understanding what to prioritize and how to prioritize it is a very necessary skill set when you get to positions of leadership in public service. And yeah, I'm glad I get to bring that into my job.
Yeah, so I guess like what elements would you say from like problem definition, identification, and like solvency do you sort of cross apply to the political sphere? So I see in campaigning and like debates, there's always sort of like the characterization of like all these problems that politicians are going to say, like, oh, I'm going to fix this if you select me, or we are going to fix this as a city. I guess like what specifically do you bring that like sort of makes it easier to identify certain problems and like fix them faster and also communicate that to like the people and the supporters to make them understand that like progress is happening?
I think curiosity is a fundamental trait that you need to have in my position, not assuming that you have the answer. I think having been in the advocacy space or having worked with advocates, oftentimes people will arrive into a position of influence with a pre-chosen solution for whatever it is they're looking at. And I think what I bring is a blank slate, or I try to. I have my own biases, just like everyone does. I have my own prejudices, just like everyone does. But I try to bring as clean of a perspective as I can into whatever it is I'm researching, and then from there, just asking a lot of questions, asking why, or how come, or why not, and just kind of like following that curiosity tree to get to like the real root of a problem, and then trying to be as cognizant of your biases as possible so you can talk to people that aren't like you, so you can talk to people that don't think like you, that might disagree with you, and then kind of trying to put everything you're absorbing together in a coherent way and kind of distilling the essence of whatever it is you're absorbing. That is more than anything is just time. It's just sitting with an issue for a while, and really thinking about it deeply. Something that I like to do is to take long walks, no headphones in, I don't take my phone or anything. I just go on a walk and I just think, just so I can like think about an issue, which is a nice luxury to have. A lot of people don't have that luxury, and I'm glad that I do.
Yeah.
And then in terms of communicating it to folks, I think once if people know that you're coming from a good place, first communicate to people that you're coming from a good place, and like you you do have their best interests at heart, and I think that comes with just natural authenticity and like I mentioned, curiosity and I think humility is very important as well. But once you have kind of like people on the same page as you, then people are willing to kind of like walk with you along that journey of how you defined a problem. It's not like you're trying to argue or debate with someone. You're just trying to walk them through your perspective, and then for the most part, people will pick up what you're putting down if you come at it from a good place.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess more on that like natural authenticity part, I guess like could you tell me more about sort of like where you grew up and like the childhood experiences that maybe shaped how you think as a policymaker and like kind of like frames the lens at which you like theorize different solutions and problems and like express that curiosity.
Sure. So, I mean, like I said, we moved to the States when I was like 6.5, 7 years old. First moved to Texas and then moved up to Illinois to the suburbs of Chicago. And so I grew up in the suburbs for the most part. I it was a time, and I'm assuming this still happens at least in the suburbs, but it was a time when kind of as a kid, like it was pretty young that my parents would just kind of let me out of the house and just bike around all day and hang out with my friends and stuff. And I didn't at the time I didn't have a phone to check in with folks. I just had my friend's parents' phone to call my parents if I needed something. But otherwise, I would just be with my friends and just kind of like bike around or be in the woods or whatever all day. And so that gave me a natural, yeah, one curiosity and a willingness to just try new stuff at a young age. So I think that's good. And growing up in a fairly diverse suburb, like actually very diverse as a suburb, I got the chance to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and was very early on aware of the fact that the way that I looked at the world wasn't the only way to look at the world, and that was okay. That was also something that my parents really taught me. I think I owe a lot to my parents and to my brother for teaching me that sense of compassion and empathy and perspective and when dealing with people. And that gives you the chance to actually hear someone rather than just try to fit what a person is saying into your own preconception of the world. That open mindedness that I was taught. Yeah.
So you'd say like having like an open mind and sort of being open to other perspectives, open to discussion, or like core family values that kind of shape the way that you approach public service and
Uh,
leadership.
Absolutely. I think that, along with a couple other things, which were, when we first moved here, for the first couple of years, like I really, I was, lonely because I had friends in India that, obviously I missed, and I spoke English with an Indian accent when I first moved here, rather than an American accent, and I was kind of like the odd one out on the school playground, and so I like assimilating into the culture was really important to me. And I still think that's a value that I uphold. I think it's important to want to understand where you are, and for to want to be understood, and respecting where you are and wanting to be respected. And I think that's really what at the core of it, like a consensual assimilation is actually about. It's not about just kind of putting your authentic self below like a sheen. It's truly understanding where you are and growing into the place where you are, and becoming a part of the community. And so that was really important to me growing up as well, like integrating into the community. And then getting into like, and then the other thing that my family gave me was the ability to kind of stand up for myself, because I think they also taught me to speak with conviction, always with humility, but to kind of stick up for myself. And that just came about as a result of our family just being willing to have back and forths at the dinner table, or in the car or wherever, and just like talk about an issue and talk about what we thought about it. And my parents always encouraged me to kind of speak, to say what I was saying, what to say what I was thinking.
No, yeah, that seems like a really interesting mindset because I've talked to a lot of people and a lot of Indians who've shared their experience immigrating and like sort of adjusting and feeling caught between two worlds or having to downplay their identity at moments. But I guess like speaking up for yourself and like, so would you say like sharing your opinion and sharing your perspective is kind of like the foundation of your like interest in politics and interest in like advocacy? And like, was that sort of like inspired by your parents?
Certainly. And I think one thing that you said that I want to just kind of like double click on a little bit of like people feeling that they have to hide their identity. I never felt like I had to hide. I think people have multiple identities, and that's okay. Like when I talk to my parents, I still talk to them in an Indian accent. I don't even think about it. I just do. And when I talk to other people, I talk with an American accent. Both of those parts are equally authentic to who I am and equally authentic to how I view the world, and that's okay. I find this like the view that you can only be one person, and that the other parts and that everything else is hiding who you really are, to be reductive and harmful to actually like creating a productive dialogue between people that aren't like you. It's my ability to have multiple parts of myself that allows me to relate to different kinds of people. And I really value that highly in myself.
Yeah. I think that people will often think about it as like, I have this world and I have that world, and these can't ever collide. But I think there are moments when these things do collide, and there is a beauty in like adjusting, and there is a beauty in like having different aspects of your identity, which you can express at different times with different people, and sort of have something that's like your home and something that like you belong to. So I guess like sort of more on that. So I know you've never like had to downplay your identity and you've never had to like sort of reduce it, but have you ever felt like being caught between two worlds was a bad thing? And have you ever had to like, has it ever been a negative situation in your life? Or
Yeah, I mean, I negative is, I feel like, an interesting word. I definitely have felt, um, I feel I am an American. Like there's no hyphen at the beginning of it. I am an American, and I'm also Indian. And the way that people will talk to me, the way that people will describe me is Indian American, and that's fine. And that both of those things are true, I think. But I love being an American. I'm proud to be an American, and I don't want to lose that aspect of my personality. Where I feel caught sometimes is when other Indian people who have born in India and grew up in India and live in India will talk to me. They will see me as just an American, or even though I wasn't born in America, like an American born confused, they see an ABCD, and they kind of write off my Indian identity, which can be a little weird because I still feel like I'm Indian, even though I haven't lived in India for a very long time. It's still just part of who I am. But I don't want to say that's a negative. I just think that's just the way that people see me. I understand it. Like I haven't lived in India since I was 6.5. I've visited since then, but I understand where people are coming from. So I give them the grace of being like, people need to categorize folks just to make it easy to understand someone. And so I get categorized as the guy who's American. To all my friends, to all my family in India, I am the American cousin or whatever, which is like, it is what it is.
yeah, no, I definitely, I definitely agree with your perspective there. And I guess like going back to what you said about like like the election, I think, and sort of like stuff that happened after that, as someone who like takes a lot of investment in like problem definition and analyzing the different solutions and asking questions. I guess this podcast and this project was sort of started up as, or to use storytelling and to explore how storytelling can be used as like an antidote to specifically online hate against Indians
Yeah,
that
yeah,
rose after the election. So I guess like, yeah,
yeah.
using that perspective of like problem definition and as like a policymaker and as someone who's also worked in tech, what's your view on like one online hate against Indian Americans and the rise of it after the election, but also how we can like move forward and how we can sort of respond to that.
It's really depressing and disheartening seeing the rise of that online hate. There's a lot that I think obviously part of it is just politically needing someone to point at and kind of like make the other. That's just a very politically powerful, politically savvy thing to do. And if you don't have if you don't have scruples around kind of making a person or making a group of people the villain, like it's a way to win elections. And so like it is what it is, but it's also founded in real bigotry and real hatred. Part of my upbringing, or a lot of my upbringing, like I was kind of aware of the whole like model minority thing of like Indian Americans show up. For the most part, we're educated. For the most part, we speak English. For the most part, we're pretty entrepreneurial and or very good like workers, so to speak. And we follow the law, and we're the immigrants who like do it right. Like I've been very aware of that model minority um thing my whole life. But I think in terms of like the recent surge in online hate, the difference between then and now is just that there's a lot more of us now in America. And it's one thing to say like, oh, Indians are the model minority, and like, oh, isn't it nice that Indian American became CEO, or that Indian American like runs a Subway franchise, or like good for them and like they did the hard work, and kind of be like, oh, that's cute when it's one out of every hundred or one out of every thousand people. But when you reach whatever critical threshold we seem to have passed, and it's like, five out of every hundred or whatever, and it feels like instead of like people kind of lauding us as an example of American success, we're now we are viewed as being extractive and kind of like and taking away from other American success. Then that's what allows the hate to kind of like really surge again. And it's yeah, I do think part of it is just a numbers thing. There's just more of us, and we've continued to be disproportionately have higher incomes or higher median incomes, disproportionately have more education. We continue to succeed by all the kind of like normative definitions of that word. And it's gotten to the point where there's enough of us now that people are like, no, that now you're scary rather than successful, because you're coming from what I have right now, is I think what people feel.
Yeah. And I think a consequence of that is that Indian people are often like weaponized against other minorities because they are like you said, the model minority, the ideal version of like how an American should be. And but again, they're not white enough, yet they're not enough of a minority because they are like kind of in this other position where where Indians, like if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, are viewed as economically more successful, yet they're still socially viewed as inferior. So I think that that's interesting how you pointed it out, that like you can be successful, but if you get too successful, you're viewed as a threat and you're viewed as extractive, you're viewed as like tokenizing. So yeah, I guess like sort of like the latter end of that question, what would you say is like a way that we can not just like deal with or like cope with the normalization of online hate and like all these jokes and stereotypes, but like I guess what are ways that we can sort of retell that model minority story and either frame like success as a good thing or just like kind of get rid of that characterization of Indians as a whole?
It's a good question. I think part of me is thinking like, how much of my life do I want to orient around batting back racist idiots? Like I just want to live my life in a way that I get to show up in a good way for family and in a good way for my community and kind of just enjoy my life and enjoy my success rather than kind of stressing out about for the most part a lot of racist idiots. It's just like why they're idiots. But I also like understand that it's incumbent on us, particularly for younger folks, to kind of push back on that narrative that seems to be surging right now. And part of me wants to say like just the more successful we are, kind of like the less they can touch us. So like just keep working hard, just keep doing the thing and keep kind of like breaking through every wall they put up in front of you. And at some point you're just not going to be able to be touched by racist idiots. But as we've seen over the last several years, that's just not true. It's a tough question. It's a really tough question. I think still for the most part, like the best answer for me at least doesn't change that much. I still want to do good. I still want to be a good person who cares about my community, and responding to hate with hate, whether that's politically effective or not, just isn't how I want to live my life. I would much rather just kind of be a person that other people can count on and hope that that's enough for now.
Yeah. I think that's actually like a great way to use skills and to use your time like effectively to represent people. But I guess more on that, like when you think about Oakland's future, because I know I love Oakland. I grew up here. I get really sad when I see that the view of Oakland by non-Oakland residents is often negative, and
Yeah.
a lot of people call Oakland like dangerous or like a lot of crime there, a lot of homeless people there. But that's not actually what the city is, and I think it's very cultural, a very fun city, has a lot of nature, has a lot of great places to be. So I guess like when you're thinking about Oakland's future as not just like a policymaker, not just like as like someone in tech, but just like as a citizen who loves playing basketball, who loves going on walks, what does
Yeah.
like a truly thriving city look to you? And maybe how does like the family and cultural values that of like openness shape that vision?
A thriving Oakland, I think it's safe, clean, green, and I think all of those things contain like novels of what those words actually mean. I think so. A thriving Oakland, for a lot of it, honestly, is like more of like a regional concept where a family or anyone, not just family, anyone can kind of, can get on the bus or can get on the train and not feel anxious about being assaulted or being kind of like in proximity to someone who they think might cause them harm, or take them or take a walk down the street and not have to pass needles or open air drug markets. I mean, like it doesn't matter if you are being harmed or not. Just kind of having that stuff visible or in the air is kind of enough to create low level anxiety that like just really severely affects people's mental health, I feel like. And so creating conditions in Oakland so that stuff doesn't exist, that would be nice. That would help Oakland thrive, I think. And then yeah, just being I honestly think like Oakland is in much better shape, obviously, than the national picture would make people think that, or the national perception of it, but there's still more work to be done. And to your question around like how I feel people should be more open to people that are different than yourself. I think that's true in Oakland too. And by that I mean, Oakland is famously one of the most progressive cities in America. And I think that means a lot of good things. But that should also mean that we're okay living next to people who we don't agree with, who who might say things that we think are vile, and have a conversation with them and go to work with them. I still think that's true, that we should create an environment where people feel safe to be who they are, as long as who they are isn't
Doesn't like hurt
causing,
someone. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, and then all of that should be kind of under the umbrella of doing something which I think Oakland is already doing a fairly good job of being a sustainable city where we are mindful of our effects on the environment, where we do create conditions for abundant housing and walkable neighborhoods so that we're not committing ourselves to car sprawl, and we make it possible for folks to use public transit to get back or bike to and from work or to the grocery store or whatever, and people feel safe parking their bike outside so they can go inside and shop for groceries. All of that is kind of part to me of a thriving Oakland.
Yeah.
And I should say, because we're in Oakland, you also can't forget about the culture and the music and arts, and that should always kind of like be, I think, a part of a thriving Oakland is just that because that's like baked into the narrative, into the history of the city, and we can't lose those stories and those storytellers and those artists.
And I especially love what you said about civil discourse and talking to someone you may not agree with, going to work with someone you may not agree with, because I think the real point at which like differences turn into chaos and differences turn into things like online hate is when those differences are viewed as like threatening or like unknown or like unexplored. So if we don't engage with people that are different than us, we won't be able to appreciate that difference. And yeah, I think that's like a really great mindset as not just like a leader, but also just like a citizen of Oakland and how to interact with people. I guess like sort of wrapping things up, you have a lot of great points and you have a lot of great advice. I guess like, do you have any specific pieces of advice for like young adults like myself who are in high school and like on the threshold of going out into the real world and going into college?
Um, I feel weird being the person to be asked to give advice now.
I guess like if you were talking to like your 17-year-old self, what would be
Yeah,
one thing you would say?
I think what I would say is if you're kind or if you're friend only when it's convenient, then you're not being a friend. And if you're kind only when it's convenient, then you're not being kind. Just keep that in mind. How other people behave at the end of the day should not be a justification for how you behave. Hold yourself to your own standard and remember what that standard is and be true to it.
Yeah, I think we should definitely be true to it and just be authentic. Yeah. Natural authenticity is definitely key to identifying, solving problems, and actually making changes. Last question. Do you have any specific message to Indian American youth?
Yeah, I think that one of the questions that you asked, around the rise in online hate, that's something that I think about every day. And it's not just online; it's also kind of on the street. It's also just in our lives. It can be really depressing and yeah, like I said, really disheartening to have to live with that. And sometimes you can feel like nothing I'm doing is mattering. Like the hate isn't going away. And I think the message that I would give people is when you're doing something that you feel is right, like inside of you, but you feel like it's not mattering, that's probably when it matters the most. I think a lot of us have like grown up under when times were, quite frankly, just at least speaking for myself, were just better. And it was easy to be who we were. And now that it's tough or tougher, that's when you should actually like really understand what it means to be who you are as a person, and hopefully that means to be kind and compassionate and empathetic, and that's when it's most important because it's easy when it's easy. So when it's tough is when you really find out how much of that is really you.
Yeah. And I think when it's tough, that's also when you find out what you really want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and having a conversation with me.
Yeah, absolutely.